Just like being on the line, if you guys are on the range and you're shooting, right? And we find ourselves in a situation where we're just getting marksmanship practice, we're just doing malfunction drills, and all of a sudden you have a jam, that is the perfect opportunity for you to recognize that something went wrong, that's not ideal in a combat or real life situation, and work through the problem. Of course, as long as you can do that safely, but that's why I never help anybody with a malfunction. I mean, obviously, eventually I will, but I usually let them work it out. I'll go right up to them and say, what are you gonna do about this? If this was the first time getting a double feed in your entire life, how are you gonna handle it?
The information in this podcast is for entertainment and educational purposes. Our informational content cannot address all dangerous situations and cannot guarantee your survival or prevent injuries when the unexpected happens. The decision to carry a firearm, either for recreation or for personal defense, carries the risk and potential for injury and/or death. Therefore, it is advised that you seek out and acquire proper training before using a firearm or any firearm-related product.
What are some self-defense techniques?
What would happen if there was a global internet outage?
What should I do if I hear shots ringing out?
Or what I should do if there's a major terrorist attack?
What should I have? What's the best?
What should I do?
What does that look like?
What would you recommend?
Is there anything I could do?
All right, guys, welcome back to Dangerous Questions, an Ironclad original. In this episode, as we get started, I want to talk about one point. I think people get these two things confused, and it has a lot to do with the questions that we're going to go into, but it has to do with either multitasking or task shifting. Multitasking, and we all know this, at least if you read into it, it can be a lie. It can be something that's not necessarily a reality. Like one of my children trying to talk to me while I'm sitting here on the phone and doing some other task, thinking that I'm giving each of them attention. We have to understand that anytime that we do that, we're diminishing the value of what we're putting our effort into. So task shifting is really important to understand, to get really good at that. And sometimes I'll be on a task, I'll be doing something, it could be a tactical, it could be a family, but either way, I'm so intently focused on what I've got going on, people could be like, does he even know what's going on around him? When the answer is yes, you have to strengthen that. It's just important to know that I'm gonna be able to put my best effort into something when I'm solely focused on that task. There is a level, like say for instance, if I'm in a combat scenario and I have a contact in front of me, I'm not completely oblivious to what's going on around me, and that takes repetition. If I'm shooting in front of me with the gun and the percussion going off, and I've got people moving or talking to me on the backside, I still need to open up my awareness enough to hear these other things going on. That doesn't mean I'm losing focus on what I have to shoot at. It just means that I'm enhancing my ability to do that task while other things are going on around me and increasing that awareness. But I'm not gonna diminish the value that I'm putting something in front of me. And that is a difference. You have to contrast those two of knowing this is task shifting and this is multitasking, where you're trying to do too many things at once, diminishing the value of each. With that being said, these questions are gonna help us break that down a little bit more, and let's get into the first one.
Look at that thing. It's rotating.
On the special 4-episode Change Agent series, Black Project, I talk with experts, whistleblowers, and insiders to try to figure out if our government is behind these strange craft, and if so, why are they keeping the truth from the public?
We're told never to talk about this.
We'll look at the history of special access programs and see just how far ahead the most secretive elements of the military-industrial complex are and what it will take to finally get the truth.
Has the government conducted secret UAP crash retrieval programs, yes or no?
Yes.
My job calls for me to deploy and stay focused on the mission set, but my family has a constant need for my attention as well. When I'm downrange, it's extremely hard for me to be an asset for my family and my team. Have you ever experienced anything like that? And what advice can you give me to avoid becoming a liability in either of my duties, both as family and a team member? And the question definitely relates to me, and yes, I've dealt with it, especially being overseas, having a growing family, getting married, and also having children while that process was going on. This goes back to what I was saying about multitasking and task shifting. my wife and I, or even fiance at the time, knew that in order for me to truly stay focused on what was going on at hand, I couldn't be totally distracted with what was going on at home. So the nice thing would be to have somebody that has your back on that. That's not always going to be the case, right? Everybody has a different situation. But what would be nice if somebody understood that and knew. And again, this is why I thank my wife all the time, because she was able to bear a lot of that burden and not even tell me things that were going on to keep me from having my mind spinning in moments where it wasn't going to be helpful to me. Now, be that as it may, there's a combination of those things that you need to understand. But ultimately, as a warrior and somebody that has that level of duty, say for instance, if you are deploying or you do have a law enforcement job, you need to at some point draw a line and step over it. And usually that was for me, putting my gear on, knowing that I would become a liability for myself and other people if I didn't completely let go of what was holding me back and have those things in the back of my head. That's why you see it all the time, that before guys deploy or before they go into the job, they need to get everything squared away. That was a big part of us deploying. Make sure your dental, your medical, all this stuff is squared away before you leave, so you're not sitting there dealing with this stuff. For law enforcement, it's even more difficult because they go home at night and then they're out doing their job. So you really have to create habits and triggers and anchors for when you go to the job, you are solely doing the job. Again, why is that difficult in today's world? Well, because you got your phone in your pocket. You're sitting there in the cruiser or you're on the job, and next thing you know, something pops up that, your wife tells you she's pregnant. And you're like, oh my goodness, that's amazing. And you're thinking about, that's all you can have your head wrapped around when you're supposed to go in this building and go after a bad guy. At that point, you need to strengthen your ability to say, this is an amazing blessing, and I'm super joyful about it, but I have to kind of put it in its place in order to do my job. One thing I would always talk about is this idea of mushin, no mind, having no mind and almost completely emptying yourself. And I think that there's an element to that that's really good to think about and get really good at, because whether I'm going back in the house at the end of the night from a long day, or I'm getting ready to walk into a door where somebody wants to take my life, I need to kind of do that. And I need to separate myself from all the things that could distract me from being the very best that I can. So my answer to anybody listening to this, and especially from this standpoint, is that if you have a job to do, you must put things in your place, in their place before you step over that line. And if you're not good at it, man, I would suggest that you find help and you find a way to be better at it. Confide into somebody, find a mentor. I mean, that's one of the things that I did in my career. I found mentors. I say, listen, this is something I'm struggling with. Help me out here. I'm carrying this burden with me and I need to clear my mind. What tools do you use? Hey, hit the gym, work on this breathing, use a trigger that, when that gun's in your hand, you remember that this is the most important job. Whatever it might be, you might find some really good advice out there, including what I'm telling you now. If you have a family that needs your time, this is where the task shift comes into play, because we want quality over quantity, I believe. Both are great. Yes, I want a lot of it and I want it to be extremely high quality. But if I'm only able to get a certain amount of time with a certain aspect of my life, say for instance, my family, I want to make sure that it's at the highest quality possible, to the best of my ability, focusing on really being intentional, not having your phone out and saying, hey, I'll be right there or I'll get right to it. Really make sure that you separate that time. That's a key element of that contrast and that task shifting. Here's the other thing. I'll end with this on this question. If you're struggling to separate the two, well then maybe it's time to contemplate if you're doing the right thing, because I don't want to leave my family any more than I have to, but if I do, it better be honoring their lives in a way that what I'm doing is making an effect, or it's valuable, or it's an honorable job. I can walk in to something, and there are things that I've looked at my children, and they're even here on set with me now. There's things that I've done in my life that are really important. Say for instance, if your community is suffering or an attack happens or there's a threat down the street, I have to look at my children and say, this is important enough for me to leave you here and go do this job. I have to go help somebody else because of the significance of it. And like the military, if nobody did that job, well then we wouldn't have the level of security and protection that we need. So there's got to be a recognition of the fact that this is important. this job means something, and I can look my children all in the eye and say, I'm going to do something honorable that's helping serve and protect other people, and I'm okay with that time away. So that if I lose my life during that job, they all know what I was doing, and they also can say to themselves, Dad was doing something righteous and good, and I'm okay with that, instead of the other way around. And if that's a question in your head, my suggestion is to pray about that and contemplate that, what that means to you. And maybe it's time to shift gears. Maybe it's time to do something else, unless you can really make peace with that and task shift appropriately. I am home with my family and I am on the job. I have to draw that line. So am I effective? I am effective at doing both of those well. If they continue to go like this, you've got to shift gears, strengthen yourself, find advice and mentors that are going to help you work through the problem. Definitely something I'm sure a lot of people can relate to, no matter what job you're in. It doesn't matter if it's corporate, law enforcement, military. There's a lot of similarities there. All right, next question. As a police officer, we were just talking about law enforcement, I often find myself in high-risk situations where fear is a real factor, and managing it is a part of the job. Given your experience with some of the most dangerous and high-stakes operations, have you ever faced a moment where you truly thought you might not make it out alive? If so, how did you process that fear in the moment and what got you through it? It kind of plays off a little bit about what I was just saying about drawing that line. There were absolutely multiple times that I was like, I definitely could die tonight. And we're going after some dudes that are willing to give their lives in order to protect themselves or their way of life. So for me, I went into that over and over and over again, knowing that that was the case. And at some point I had to make peace with it. I would relate it to the first part of my first deployment ever in Afghanistan. And I was in the number one truck, the lead gunner in the number one point man truck. So what does that do? It exposes you to a lot of IEDs and threats that other people aren't going to be exposed to as you run through any town, road, tight scenario, valley, it doesn't matter. There were some really, really, really tense situations where for the first deployment ever, I'm like, oh, this is really real, really quick. And the tension that I carried and felt in those moments was extremely intense, almost to the point of exhaustion, where it would end a day and you would just go into your bed and just absolutely pass out because of the intensity of it. And at some point, I realized that I was carrying that stress that really wasn't helping me. It wasn't allowing me to be any more vigilant. In fact, some of that stress and some of that fear stopped me from being the best version of myself. And I would say it was probably around 60 days in. I would say if I had to guess, it would be about 60 to 70 days in, right around that point where I almost felt myself going, oh, you know what? I can't control everything that happens. I can only control what I am responsible for, my duty as a lead gunner and the field of fire that I have. And it was almost like instantaneously I received a calmer focus, really ultimately trusting in what God was putting me in front of and trusting me what he was asking me to do. And if this went sideways and if this was my time, so be it. Then that's what God permitted and that's what God wanted for me in my entire life. That's why I count my blessings that I'm here. But at the same time, I realized that it was taking away from my effectiveness and I had to draw a line. I had to release the fear, release the concern, release the anxiety, and just be a good warrior. Be the best warrior that I could given that operation and given that time and given the circumstance. So that played a part throughout my entire career where I just learned to control that more. And I do believe that if you get really good at doing what you're doing, especially if you have a job where you're going to chase bad guys, you have to make peace with that at some point. It does not mean don't be vigilant. It does not mean drop your awareness. It does not mean relax, in fact. It just means that you obtain a calmer sense of the job that you're doing. I'm fully on, and the fact that I actually know what's going on allows me to relax more. This is the contrast I think that a lot of people talk about going out in town. It's like, I gotta have my back against the wall. I gotta know everything and every little thing that's moving on. And sometimes I even hear people, I'm like, man, that's exhausting. I don't want to think like that. But me having more training and knowing that I could draw my gun and respond very quickly with an accurate shot and move my family and myself in the best position possible actually allows me to relax more. I can actually take a moment, breathe and be like, okay, I'm assessing what's going on, but I'm not going to overreact to anything because I know I can get ahead of the power curve. That's why I always encourage people to have the proper training. Some of the fear, some of the things that people are carrying are, say for instance, you're a police officer, you're in law enforcement, cuffing somebody. I would challenge a lot of people out there to say that you probably don't really know how to cuff somebody really well in an engagement situation where you're going to go hand to hand. And what does that do? That causes concern, it causes nervousness and a little bit of anxiety because you're like, man, I might have to grab this guy and cuff him, and he's pretty big and he looks pretty strong. Well, if you haven't practiced the techniques, then you are going to be concerned, and rightfully so. But if you train and you get ahead of that power curve, that's what allows you to have the calm focus. That at some point, you start to realize, oh, I have the confidence to cuff this guy. So even though he's big and he might be a little bit bigger than me and maybe even stronger than me, I can manipulate him in a way that's going to get him in a position I need to be able to cuff him and put him in a situation where he's not a threat anymore. That puts me in a calm focus. I'm like, okay, I can deal with it. I've done this before. And if you are at that level, if you're at a tier 1 or a higher level, law enforcement or military, I encourage you to seek more training. And you'll see right away that increases your confidence and crushes your fear. Action crushes fear. Being confident crushes fear. And you gain that calm focus. So hopefully that explains a little bit about, how to deal with those situations and how to really bring the best version of yourself no matter what the case may be. We're all growing in that, by the way, but that's at least my experience.
Ironclad creates premium content no matter the environment. From extreme elements to unforgiving terrain, we thrive on crafting content that captures the essence of your brand in the most challenging conditions. Bring your brand story to life, ensuring your message leaves an impact. Ready to elevate your vision? Connect with us today at ironcladagency.com.
Next question. I run a business, and I've definitely had my fair share of making calls that seemed like the right move, only for them to blow up in my face, costing me time, money, and sometimes trust. I can imagine that in combat, a bad decision can have a way bigger consequence or have way bigger consequences. Have you ever had or made a tactical call that went completely sideways? What happened? How'd you bounce back from it? What did it teach you about handling pressure in those high stakes moments? So even in business, I've made mistakes. I've done things that I thought was the right call, and it ended up costing me money and probably trust along the way. And the blessing in all of these things, first, let's talk about that because they're going to happen. We're not going to be immune to it for the rest of our lives, whether we're in combat, law enforcement, or in business. We're going to deal with things that are unforeseen. We are going to get punched in the teeth from time to time. I believe with all my heart that there's two things going on. A, you're being saved from something else that you couldn't have otherwise seen. And B, you are learning a ton from it because you are going to be able to go back and help somebody else that's going to deal with the same situation you were in. That's why being in communion with other people, and that's why having friendship with other people is so critically important because you share those experiences. What have we done today? We've fooled ourselves into thinking that we know everything because we've got Google at our fingertips. Oh, I can just Google, what do you do if I run into this business challenge? You might find some good data. But you know what we really suck at today? We suck at going to our elders and saying, hey, Dad, hey, Uncle Tom or Uncle Dave, what did you do in this situation that really taught you something? And I think that even though we have technology and we think we know everything, we miss small details that can really make a big impact for us along the way. And I encourage everybody, even myself, to go back and lean on mentors and lean on people that have done this before you. And there's a lot more knowledge transfer that happens in those scenarios. And we just got to be able to use that as a resource, as an asset. Don't think the internet's going to give you everything that you need to be successful. But ultimately, you're being given one of these experiences so you can go and teach somebody else at some point. And that's going to get rid of that mindset of think about the people that hold on to things. They hold on to it for dear life and they live with it every day. I mean, that also is really devastating to your mindset, to your life, to your way of life, your quality of life. We really are called to let things go. Forgive and forget, let it go. It's in the past. If you cannot do anything to control it and it's not making you any better today, then you have got to release it, because all it's doing is keeping your brain enslaved into something that doesn't exist anymore. I think that's what a lot of people deal with in these specific instances, whether it was in combat or was on a business venture. You know, the last point that I'll say about this is, how did I overcome it? How did I bounce back? And what it really comes down to is adaptability. It's your ability to recognize that the worst thing I can do is dwell on what just happened and say, oh my goodness, I messed something up, or that guy messed something up, or he didn't go the right way. Is if CQB teaches you anything, it's like, well, things happen in a different way every single time. You could run the same building 300 different ways, and every single time you go in there, it's different. And because you get to see that, you know part of your job is to adapt, especially if you're in the back of the train. It's never going to look the same. So I have to have the ability to know that in business and in combat, it's the same exact thing. I look for people that are high adaptability. When I hire anybody, you know, on the Crush Everything team, or I put together a team to do something specific, I want high adaptability. Again, it goes back to one of my favorite quotes. A good plan executed violently now is better than a perfect plan executed a week from now. Why? Because as soon as you hit the plan, as soon as you hit the ground running, things change. Life changes. Things are changing all around us right now that weren't the way we thought they were yesterday. So if we're going to dwell on that, it's going to hold us back. But if we're able to have somebody that can adapt quickly, smartly, and intently, then they're right up with us and they're figuring it out with us. So adaptability is really where I always looked at as a very, very high characteristic and something that was a good value. Like honor, like trust, all those things, adaptability needs to be one of those elements that you have as a warrior, as a warfighter, as a team member, so that you can improve that in yourself. So no matter what you're doing, the next time ask yourself a question. Was I able to adapt when something happened? In training or in real life, did something come into my life and experience that maybe even was traumatic and I was unable to adapt? I got stuck in that same spot. If you're identifying that, it's time for you to realize why and then start working on your adaptability. And that will get you through most of these situations, if not all of them. Great question though. Next question. As a paramedic, I've been in high stress situations where my body or equipment had to perform flawlessly because lives were on the line. Have you ever been in a real world situation where your body gave out at a critical moment? If so, what happened? And how did you push through it? If not that, have you ever experienced a catastrophic equipment failure in the field, and how did you adapt in the moment? There's that word again, adaptation, right? Ultimately, that's what it comes down to when you see these things happening. I mean, I was even in a recent scenario in a deer stand, you know, where I was hunting this last season, and everything was going fine. I was standing up in the ready position. You know, I had multiple deer in front of me. I mean, it was a long, drawn out situation, you know, about an hour and a half in total, where I'm watching deer move, and I took a shot on the first one. Well, actually, it was the third one, and then he spun out, lost movement of his legs, and then I took a follow-up shot and hit him in the heart. But because I was in that position so long and there was all these factors that occurred, I got down from that stand and my legs completely locked up on me. And I've never had that happen before. And I was thinking to myself immediately, and whether this was a spiritual experience or not, for me, it absolutely was. And recognizing that, I was like, oh, if I was in combat right now, what would I be doing? If my legs cramped up that bad, where I was in such intense pain, what would my next move be? Could I still get my gun up and take a shot? Could I still move over to the left if somebody was firing at me? Those are the moments that God's gonna open up as an opportunity for you to train in. And if it ever happens in training or in a situation like I was in, it was a pretty controlled environment. Nobody was around me, nobody was shooting at me. I was like, great, this is a gift to be able to see how am I gonna work through this scenario. Just like being on the line. If you guys are on the range and you're shooting, right? And we find ourselves in a situation where we're just getting marksmanship practice. We're just doing malfunction drills. And all of a sudden you have a jam. That is the perfect opportunity for you to recognize that something went wrong, that's not ideal in a combat or real life situation, and work through the problem. Of course, as long as you can do that safely, but that's why I never help anybody with a malfunction. I mean, obviously, eventually I will, but I usually let them work it out. I'll go right up to them and say, what are you gonna do about this? If this was the first time getting a double feed in your entire life, how are you gonna handle it? So part of this question is for me to call everybody out and say, are you training appropriately to make sure that you know nobody's gonna come to your rescue, nobody's gonna save you? Are you working through these things in your training, and are you fighting through them to the best of your ability and problem solving to the best of your ability? You know, I've had multiple situations where things like this have happened, and it really does come down to adaptation. It comes down to recognizing in training when weaknesses get exposed, whether they're equipment or whether they're physical, that's your time to go back to the drawing board. That's your time to say, you know what, physically, I wasn't able to keep up with those guys when they were running 1.5 miles to a target, almost in a dead sprint. You recognize really quick if you're out of shape or not. And I remember doing that and being like, thank goodness that I can run with all my kit on, because I know guys aren't practicing to sprint with full kit for 1.5 miles. That's just not something that guys were used to doing. But we got a call and we had to move targets immediately. And so there were guys there that were gassed. So now the door opens up and you got a guy in there that wants to shoot at you. Are you ready to enter that room? Well, hopefully we're finding all this out in training. We're finding our equipment failures. We're finding our physical failures in training so that we can go back to the drawing board, prepare for them, and then apply them so that when we show up on the X, we are ready to go. That's why, you know, for me, yeah, it is kind of a nightmare to think that I would go through one of these situations and not be ready, which is why we put so much emphasis on getting ready for the X by preparing and training at a higher level that anybody even understands, because that's what we did in the teams, and that application should be applied to everything else that we do in our lives so that we can show up ready to go. All right, so that wraps up the questions, and that's gonna bring us into one of the scenarios where we're gonna talk about equipment. Let's check it out. This is a scenario on the side of a street. You can already see this guy's masked up. Already, equipment malfunction on the bad guy's side. Now, I talk about this all the time in my training, okay? This guy's working through a malfunction on his gun. Praise God in this scenario, because that just saved whoever was running away from him's life. Now, when I always talk about the OODA loop, this is a great video to break the OODA loop down. Why? Observe, orient, decide, and act. The bad guy is doing that just as much as we are. And when I talked about the training that we do ahead of time, we're trying to shrink that OODA loop down to nothing, right? So we can make those decisions. We can observe, orient, decide, and act as quick as possible. Now, the bad guy's having to go through that same process where he's deciding and acting on what to do. Now, again, thank you, Lord, that he doesn't have the training to get that gun back up and running. Whatever it is that he's looking for, it might have been a round that popped out. It kind of looks like a round that he was trying to get back that maybe popped out of the gun. But either way, this equipment malfunction ended up saving this guy his life. And, you know, there's pros and cons to understanding this, because what am I going to do if I see a bad guy with a malfunction? If he's within arm's length distance or maybe even further, this is why knowing your equipment and knowing what's going on in these environments is so critical. Because if I saw that gun jam, and this is why a weapon takeaway, you know, within that arm's length distance, I'm assessing the gun. I'm assessing the status of the gun, the functionality of the gun. What is it? Does he have his hand on it? Is the finger on the trigger? Is there a safety on it? Is it out of battery? All of those things are going to give me more knowledge and confidence to what my move needs to be next, right? If somebody puts a gun in my face and it's on safe, I'm like, okay, well, that's one more thing that he has to do that's going to increase my confidence and being able to, boom, get it offline, pull that thing into me, and then crush the guy. Just like this, if this guy had any training with firearms, he might have just been able to look over his shoulder and be like, oh, that guy's actually coming after me because his gun's jamming and he's trying to get it back up and running. That might mean at that point, crash the gap. I don't care if it's 6, 10 feet. If I see an opportunity, especially if the option is an open field behind me, well, where am I going? I'm going in nowhere. I'm going just to create more distance that he could just regain by running towards me. So I want to be able to know that reactionary gap intimately so that when I see a malfunction, I can crash in, control that firearm. Remember, the 3 things: for counter weapon, clear, control, and then crush. But I always caveat that with make sure you get training in. Use your best instincts. Could somebody put a gun to your head right this very instant and you would have to take action? That's very possible. But don't get overconfident about it where you start putting yourself in a bad situation. Here's what I'll end with and what I mean by that. I get people come to our courses all the time and a gun comes out and they get like the mad face and the fighting stance and they're like, yeah, you're gonna pull a gun out on me? And I'm like, wait, well, hold on 1 second. You might know how to take a gun away, but don't act like you're going to, right? You're not putting yourself in a great scenario. You've got to trust your instincts, but you also have to, you have to be reading the scenario. Read the context of what's going on. That's gonna put you in the best situation possible. The guy might be super nonchalant. He could be super intense. He could have a malfunction. He could be super serious and professional. You would feel the difference if I came into a room and I was like, stay right there and don't move, versus a criminal or a thug that doesn't have much training that's just trying to shake you down and get some change. You're gonna feel the difference and you gotta use your best instincts. In this situation, thank God the guy got away because of the malfunction, but it ended up being on the bad guy's side. Remember, we wanna shrink our OODA loop down to nothing so we can observe, orient, decide, and act accordingly to protect ourselves, our family, and ultimately be that asset that everybody needs. This is Dangerous Questions, an Ironclad original. God bless you guys. We'll see you on the next one. Peace.
For the past 15 years, we've been known as the turnkey branded content company, right? That means that we take brand and content to the next level. So if you're Garmin and you want us to shoot your new watch at the side of a cliff in the middle of Colorado, we source the location, we get the permits, we find the talent, we get the side-by-sides. We make everything happen for a world-class piece of branded content. And that's really where we've kind of cut our teeth. About 5 years ago, we launched Ironclad Originals as the second part of Ironclad. So you've got the branded content on one side, and you've got Ironclad Originals. And what Ironclad Originals is, intellectual properties by way of franchises that can start as a podcast, build an audience, and develop into a film or series that can be licensed or purchased by a major streaming platform. So to date, we've launched 8 Ironclad Originals. Every one of them has topped the charts on Spotify and Apple and have grown to today over 5 million downloads a month. We're doing partnerships with Warner Brothers, major sporting networks, and many, many other brands to bring their product to our audience by way of our podcast. Now, you may have seen some of our podcasts with Andy Stumpf, Vincent Vargas, Dom Raso. We're launching 4 more this year. So these Ironclad Originals are going to continue to evolve, continue to grow, and by the end of this year, our target is to have 10 million unique audience members on the Ironclad Original platform. Now, these two sides of Ironclad are really yin and yang to one another, and you can come in on either side of that. One note is, the branded content and the original content has come together for one more unique offering called a brand podcast. We've taken all of our expertise on the Ironclad Original side, mixed with the service-based business of the branded content, and now we're providing branded podcasts. That's a turnkey podcast that we can launch from 0 to full scale within 60 days. And we'll do 52 weeks of unique content where we build the studio, build the brand, book the guest, edit the shows, host the shows, engineer the shows, take everything that makes an Ironclad Original unique, apply it to a brand, and build owned content for our brand partners that can take a brand to a whole nother level. As we close this out, I just want you to think, this is something that you should be doing, whether it's with or without Ironclad. We truly believe that you should be creating brand podcasts. We truly believe you need the best branded content in the world. We truly believe you need a partner that can tell your story at an elite level. Okay, so this is something that you need to be doing with or without Ironclad. But one thing about Ironclad is that we are drinking our own Kool-Aid. We believe in this so much, we're investing in originals. We are testing the waters. We have the connections happening on this side of the house. We're proven and tested on the brand side. And we promise that if you come to us, we will bring all those resources together and bring them to you. And we will be an extension to your team to make you operate at an elite level. So those are the things that we're offering here at Ironclad. We're so excited. Thank you so much for all your support. We love you all.